In the crowded heart of Hong Kong, neon lights burn through the haze of humidity, buses roar down narrow streets, and temples flicker with the red glow of incense sticks planted in brass urns. It is a city where skyscrapers scrape the heavens, but shadows still cling to the alleys below. And among the countless stories that live here, there is one concept that haunts conversations whispered in tea houses, written into operas, and passed down in hushed tones from grandparents to grandchildren. Why Yuenya? Yuenya, translated loosely, it means resentment karma. In Cantonese folk belief, life is not a straight journey, but a wheel turning endlessly. A person may live, die, and return in another form, another name, another face. But while the body changes, the soul carries its imprint, the signature that remains across lifetimes. When betrayal or cruelty scars that signature, it is said that the debt does not dissolve. It waits. If you wrong someone badly, enough cheated them, betrayed their love, or caused their death, then their spirit may cling to you across reincarnations. They may find you in your next life. They may call you by the name you once carried, a name you no longer remember, but one they can never forget. And when they do, they will demand what is owed. Most Hong Kongers know this as an abstract cautionary tale, a reminder to treat others with fairness. But every now and then, someone claims to have walked directly into the grip of Yuan Yip itself. These are the stories that linger, that spread, that settle like smoke in the cracks of the city. Tonight I will share two of them. The first belongs to Tony, an manager who thought his long nights in a damp underground garage were merely inconvenient until he met the eyes of a woman in red who seemed to know him better than he knew himself. The second belongs to Sonny, a finance worker who entered an elevator late at night and stepped into a time-bending nightmare. His ears filled with the sound of a ghostly song. Two men, two parking garages. Two encounters that left them forever questioning not just what they saw, but who they had once been. If you're listening to this story alone, you may want to leave a light on behind you. Shadows can play tricks, especially when stories like this awaken old fears. Because if Cantonese folklore is right, and debts truly carry over lifetimes, then the question is not whether you believe, but whether anyone out there still has a claim on you. Tony had always thought of himself as rational. Numbers and systems guided his days, and logic was his anchor. At 33, he was already a manager in the IT department of a trading firm, kind of job that demanded long hours but offered stability. His office was sleek and modern, a tower of glass that glittered above the Nathan Road traffic. Yet the parking garage beneath his apartment complex was a very different world. It was built in the 1970s, concrete poured, thick and gray, ceilings low, fluorescent lights buzzing with a tired hum. The air down there was always damp, carrying the faint tank of mildew, mixed with something worse, maybe, or just decades of neglect. Rust streaked the metal stair railings, paint peeled from the pillars, and every sound echoed, hollow and amplified, until even a set of keys jingling seemed sharp enough to cut through the air. Still, Tony preferred parking there. He owned a modest sedan, nothing flashy, but he treated it with care. His usual spot was tucked against a concrete pillar on the third floor, away from the crowded lanes where careless neighbors might scrape the paint. Night after night, often close to midnight, Tony would pull in after leaving the office, cut the engine, and step out into that cavern of shadows. It was on one such night, 10 years ago, when things began. He had worked late preparing a software migration. His mind was foggy with fatigue, and he thought only of showering and sleep. As he locked the car, he felt a presence, something close, too close. And then, directly in his ear, a voice. Sam, soft female, almost tender. Tony froze. His name wasn't Sam. It never had been. He turned sharply, scanning the row of parked cars, the pillars, the corners where darkness pooled. Nothing. Just his own breathing, fast and shallow. He stood there for a moment longer, heart thudding. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe a neighbor had whispered to her boyfriend, and the sound had echoed strangely. That had to be it. He shook his head, unlocked the stairwell door, and forced himself to dismiss it. By the time he reached his apartment upstairs, he had almost convinced himself it was nothing. But the next night, he returned close to midnight again. This time, as he stepped from his car, the air around him seemed heavier, colder. A prickle slid down the back of his neck. He glanced around nervously, half expecting to hear the voice again. It didn't come. Instead, as he walked toward the elevator, his phone rang loudly, making him jump. His friends wanted to know if he was free for Suiyaya midnight meal. Relieved for the distraction, Tony laughed it off, got back into his car, and drove to meet them. Yet even as he sat in a noisy Dai Pai Dong, steam rising from bowls of noodles, clattering chopsticks and chatter filling the air, Tony couldn't shake the memory, that whisper, that name, Sam. Why would anyone call him that? And why did it feel less like a mistake and more like a claim? That night he returned home later than usual. As he pulled into the same spot, he caught something in his peripheral vision, a figure. Standing by the very pillar he parked beside, half in shadow. A woman, long hair veiling her face, a red dress hanging like a sheet of flame in the dim garage light. She didn't move, she only watched. Tony's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He blinked hard, looked again. She was still there, and then she wasn't. Tony barely slept that night. He lay awake staring at the ceiling of his small flat, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her again, the woman in red, unmoving by the pillar, her hair concealing her face. He tried to convince himself it was a trick of the light, a stranger passing through, even a hallucination born of fatigue. But the memory was too sharp, too precise. His logical mind, the part of him that thrived on code and circuits, had no explanation. The next evening, he told himself he wouldn't park in that spot again. Superstitious nonsense or not, why tempt fate? Yet when he arrived after another long shift, he found the first 2 levels completely full. The 3rd level was nearly packed as well except for 2 spaces at the far end. One was his usual spot by the concrete pillar, the other directly beside it. Relief flooded him. He would take the adjacent spot. Close, but not the same. It was enough. He reversed carefully, eyes flicking to his mirrors, easing the car neatly between the lines. When he cut the engine and stepped out, his breath caught in his throat. He wasn't in the new space. He was back in his usual one. The very spot he swore he would avoid. Tony stood there frozen, his keys clutched tightly in his hand. He was certain he had angled the car correctly. He had seen the lines of the empty space beside his usual one. He had turned the wheel deliberately. So why, standing here now, was his car nestled perfectly where it always was, pressed against the pillar? A chill spread through him, cold and clammy. The garage seemed too quiet, the shadows too deep. Something wasn't right. Fumbled back into the driver's seat, his only thought to leave. As the headlights flared to life, his breath locked in his chest. She was there again. Directly in front of the car, framed in the beams of light, the woman in red. Her dress shimmered faintly as though made of smoke and blood. Her long black hair covered most of her face, but through the strands, he glimpsed pale skin. Lips that didn't quite move yet formed words he could hear clearly, as if whispered right into his ear. "Sam, you don't remember me?" The voice was the same as before, the same whisper that had called his name in the dark. Panic surged. "You've got the wrong person," Tony muttered aloud, though his voice shook. "I'm not Sam. You've made a mistake." Her head tilted slightly, her voice sharpened. "So now, you don't know me? After all I gave, after all I lost, I died because of you, Sam. And now you don't even remember who I am? I want you to come with me." Invisible hands clamped around Tony's throat, gasped, clawing at his neck. His vision blurred as the pressure tightened, air snatched from his lungs. He could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Gah. His hands trembled against the steering wheel. And then, another voice. Calm, firm, male. "Miss Koo, debts of a past life should stay in the past. Let it go." The suffocating grip loosened instantly. Tony collapsed against the seat, dragging in ragged gulps of air. He looked up through watery eyes, and the woman in red was gone. Standing by the hood of his car instead was a man in a security guard's uniform. Middle-aged, his posture steady, his eyes unwavering. The guard leaned down, his voice low. "Are you all right, sir?" Tony tried to answer, but his voice cracked. He nodded weakly. The man's gaze held his for a moment, serious, almost pitying. Then he said quietly, "You should not park here again. You're fortunate tonight that I was nearby. Next time you may not be." And just like that, he stepped back into the shadows. Tony blinked. When he looked again, the man was gone. Tony didn't drive for 3 days, took the MTR instead, even though it meant longer commutes and crowded trains. He told himself he just needed a break from the stress, that sleep and routine would settle his nerves. But in truth, the image of that woman and read her words, her hands around his throat, had lodged itself deep inside him. On the 4th night, he finally drove again. It was raining, the downpour drumming against the windshield as he approached the parking garage. He felt his chest tighten the closer he got. When he reached the gate, the usual guard waved him through. For a second, Tony almost asked him about the other man, the one who had saved him. But the words stuck in his throat. Something told him that, if he asked, the answer would not make sense. He parked this time, deliberately choosing the 2nd floor. He sat for a long time with the engine off, gripping the wheel, waiting. Nothing happened. No whispers, no shadows, only the patter of rain. Relief washed over him. Maybe, just maybe, it had all been a hallucination born of exhaustion. But the relief didn't last. A week later, he was forced to park back on the 3rd floor. His usual avoidance strategy failed. The lower levels were full. Told himself he would just keep his head down, get out fast, and leave. But as soon as he cut the engine, the world shifted. The air turned icy, his breath misting in the cabin. The rearview mirror darkened, as though shadows had gathered behind him. And then, reflected faintly in the glass, she appeared. The woman in red. Sam. Tony leapt from the car, stumbling toward the stairwell. Took the steps 2 at a time, his heart hammering. By the time he reached his apartment, he was drenched in sweat, every nerve screaming. That night, he couldn't sleep. At dawn, he did something he never thought he'd do. He visited a Taoist temple. He explained his story to an elderly priest who listened without interruption. When Tony finished, the man nodded gravely. "You have encountered a Yon Yippa karmic debt. This woman believes you wronged her in a past life. Such bonds do not break easily. She will follow you until it is resolved." Tony swallowed. "What do I do?" The priest instructed him to perform a simple offering, burning joss paper and incense in the garage where he first encountered her. The ritual would acknowledge her presence, give her spiritual wealth, and, with luck, soothe her anger. Tony obeyed. That evening, he returned with a bundle of offerings. He lit them near the pillar of his usual parking spot. The flames curled upward, smoke drifting into the stagnant air. For a while, nothing happened, and the flames sputtered, as if choked by wind that wasn't there. The fire died too quickly, leaving behind only ash. That night, she returned. Tony was driving along a busy highway when dizziness swept over him, his vision blurred. On the roadside, he saw Hermes Koo in her red dress, pale face shining against the dark. He jerked the wheel in shock and his car veered into the path of a speeding truck. Instinct saved him. He swerved back, the truck blaring its horn as it roared past. His car spun, crashing into the bushes at the roadside. The airbags exploded, the seatbelt biting into his chest. He staggered out, shaken but alive. Damn. She had nearly killed him. Tony knew then, offerings weren't enough. This was deeper, older, and it wasn't going to end unless he faced her head-on. The near collision with the truck shook Tony more than he wanted to admit. For days afterward, he felt a phantom tightness in his chest, the echo of invisible hands clawing at his throat. At night, he dreamed of red cloth fluttering, of a woman's voice calling out from the shadows, soft but insistent. "Sam, come with me." He knew the small ritual with Joss's paper had failed. If anything, it had made her angrier, so he returned to the temple. The same priest studied him with weary eyes and shook his head. "She is bound by resentment. Simple offerings cannot release her. You must invite a master, someone strong enough to guide her spirit away." Tony didn't hesitate. Contacted a Taoist master, a figure well known in the city for handling severe hauntings. Arrangements were made quickly, because even the master admitted the case sounded dangerous. On a humid evening, a week after the crash, Tony met him and 2 assistants at the entrance of the parking garage. They carried bundles of incense, ceremonial swords, and yellow talismans painted with black ink. The garage seemed darker than usual, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. Echoes carried through the cavernous levels as the small group set up near Tony's cursed parking spot. The master placed a wooden table against the pillar, laid out offerings of fruit, rice and incense, and lit candles whose flames sputtered against the damp air. Tony stood to the side, clutching his car keys like a talisman of his own. The chanting began. Low, rhythmic. A flow of syllables Tony didn't understand, but that reverberated through his chest. The assistants moved in a slow circle, burning talismans whose ashes scattered in the still air. The master struck a small bronze gong, its metallic ring echoing off the concrete, calling something forth. And then she came. At first it was just the shift of shadows. Then, in the far corner of the garage, a figure coalesced, faint, wavering, but undeniable. A woman in red. Her hair veiled her face, but her voice carried cold and piercing. Sam. Tony's knees almost buckled. He gripped the pillar for support, his breath shallow. The master's voice grew louder, commanding. He called her by name, Miss Chu, the name the mysterious guard had spoken. Tony's stomach twisted. The master ordered her to release her grudge, to accept the offerings, to move on to reincarnation. But she resisted. Her form shivered, split, reformed. The shadows thickened, the temperature plummeting. One of the candles blew out, then another. Tony's breath misted in the air. He betrayed me, her voice cried, echoing through the garage. He promised and abandoned me. He left me to die. The master's chanting grew forceful, talismans flaring as if catching unseen sparks. His assistants sprinkled rice wine across the floor, the smell sharp and sour. Slowly, painfully, the red figure began to thin. Her cries softened, fading into whispers. At last, with one final command, the master slashed his sword through the air. A gust of wind roared through the garage, and she was gone. The smoke thinned. The air warmed again. The master exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. It is done, he said. For now, Tony felt lightheaded with relief. For the first time in weeks, he believed it might be over, but something nagged at him. On his way out, he stopped by the security station near the garage entrance. The regular guard sat inside, sipping tea. Tony asked casually if there was another guard who sometimes patrolled, an older man. The guard frowned. Another guard? There's only me. Always has been. Tony's blood ran cold. So who had saved him that night? For several days after the ritual in the garage, Tony felt lighter. He walked without that gnawing dread in his chest. The parking lot no longer felt suffocating, and even his apartment seemed warmer, as if some unseen weight had finally lifted. Friends noticed he looked better, more energetic. He allowed himself to believe it was over. But hauntings rarely end so cleanly. It was a Friday evening when the illusion shattered. Tony had spent the day at work, then gone out for dinner with colleagues. Around 11:30 p.m., he was driving home along a busy 4-lane road that wound between hills and clusters of neon-lit shops. The hum of traffic surrounded him, headlights flashing past, the radio playing softly. Then suddenly, the world tilted. A wave of dizziness crashed over him. His vision blurred, the road swam like water, and his hands clenched the wheel tighter. The radio sputtered into static. Through the haze, he saw her. On the shoulder of the road, beneath a flickering streetlight, a woman in red stood still. Her hair streamed as if blown by wind, though the air outside was calm. Her face was hidden, but Tony didn't need to see it. He knew. Miss Chu. And this time, she wasn't whispering. Her voice filled the car, everywhere at once, sharp and furious. Sam, you took everything. You ruined me. You will not escape. The wheel jerked in his hands. His car swerved across the lane, tires screeching. Headlights blazed toward him, a truck barreling straight into his path. Time slowed. Tony's chest locked. He thought of his parents, of the friends he had just left, of unfinished plans, of the life he still wanted to live. The truck horn roared, deafening. At the last instant, adrenaline snapped him back. He wrenched the wheel, swerving hard to the right. His car clipped the curb, smashed into a bush, and spun to a stop, airbags exploding white against his face. The truck thundered past, horns still blaring, fading into the distance. Silence followed. His own heartbeat filled his ears. He sat there, stunned, smoke curling from the airbag, hands trembling on the wheel. The streetlight flickered overhead. He looked toward the roadside. She was gone. Emergency responders later confirmed he was lucky. Bruises, scratches, and a minor concussion. Nothing more. The car, however, was ruined. It had absorbed the impact and was beyond repair, but Tony knew it wasn't just an accident. This was a message. The ritual had only driven her away temporarily. Miss Koo still clung to him, bound by something older than this life. In the days that followed, he couldn't shake the paranoia. Every shadow on the street seemed to move. Every reflection in a car window made him flinch. He refused to drive again, switching to buses and trains. Public transportation was crowded, noisy, anonymous, but at least he didn't have to be alone in the dark with her waiting. Still, he felt eyes on him. One evening, while boarding a bus, he caught a glimpse in the window, a smear of red fabric behind him, there for only a heartbeat. He blinked, turned, and saw nothing, but the chill in his bones told him she was not gone. The Taoist master had warned him that some debts run deep, too deep for a single ritual to erase. Resentment from a past life, especially sealed by betrayal and death, can survive across reincarnations, and Nasich's grudge was far from satisfied. After the accident, Tony knew he could not leave things unresolved. The first Taoist priest had given him temporary relief, but the near death on the road proved that Miss Koo's grudge had not been extinguished. Her presence was more dangerous than ever, and her persistence meant she was still bound to him, to Sam, the man he once had been in another life. So Tony reached higher, sought out a renowned Taoist master, a man whose reputation stretched across Hong Kong. People said he was not just a ritualist, but a mediator between the living and the dead. If anyone could help Miss Chu move on, it was him. The master listened quietly as Tony explained everything. The whispers in the garage, the suffocation in the car, the crash, the red dress. The old man's eyes narrowed, but he did not seem surprised. He had heard such things before. "This is Yuan Yip," he said, voice low but steady. Karmic resentment carried from one life into the next. A powerful grudge, especially one bound by betrayal and death in red, does not fade easily. She is not only angry, she believes she was wronged beyond repair. To her, you are not Tony. You are Sam. She sees your soul, not your face, and she will follow until she feels justice. Tony asked what justice meant. Did she want his life? The master shook his head. Perhaps. But more often, they want recognition. They want their suffering witnessed, their pain honored, their soul given passage. The worst thing you can do is deny them.
What?
The ritual I propose will not erase her. It will acknowledge her. It will guide her toward transcendence if she chooses to take it. So the ritual was arranged. On a humid evening, Tony and the Taoist master returned to the same parking garage where it had all begun. The air smelled of oil and mildew, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. The space seemed emptier than usual, as if the shadows themselves had withdrawn, waiting for what was to come. The master brought with him several monks. They carried drums, cymbals, and bundles of incense thick as bamboo stalks. A small altar was set up near the concrete pillar where Tony had first heard her whisper. On it, they placed offerings, bowls of fruit, cups of tea, and a whole roast chicken. Sheets of golden joss paper were stacked like miniature stairs to the other world. As night fell, the ceremony began. The monks' voices rose in long, resonant chants, syllables older than the city itself. Their drums pounded like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding. Cymbals clashed, sharp as lightning. Smoke thickened, carrying with it the heavy perfume of sandalwood. The Taoist master stood before the altar, holding a wooden sword inscribed with sacred characters. His chants were different, firmer, commanding. He was not asking, he was directing. Inviting Miss Chu to come forward, to hear, to accept release. And she came. Tony felt it before he saw it, the sudden drop in temperature, the way his breath fogged, as though winter had entered the garage. Then, by the pillar, she appeared. The woman in the red dress, long hair shrouding her face, body wavering faintly as if half smoke, half flesh. She did not move. She only stared. The master's chants grew louder. He lifted the wooden sword, then sliced it through the air. The monks clashed their cymbals. Flames roared as the joss paper ignited, golden embers swirling upward like 1,000 souls ascending. "Miss Ku," the master called out, voice echoing against the concrete walls. "Your grievance is heard. Your suffering is witnessed. The debt of the past is acknowledged. But this life is not his. It is yours to release. Step forward into the path of light." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, her head tilted upward. Through the curtain of hair, Tony glimpsed a face pale and fractured, but with eyes that burned like embers. The air pulsed with pressure. Tony's chest tightened. Memories not his own flashed through his mind, an old Hong Kong street. A woman's laughter, a promise broken, her hand gripping his, her scream. He staggered, clutching his head, overwhelmed by fragments of a life he never lived, yet somehow carried, and then release. The sound of weeping filled the garage, thin and distant, fading as if carried away by the chanting. Her figure dissolved, smoke unraveling into the air, until there was nothing left but the glow of incense and the echo of drums. When the chanting ceased, the silence felt profound, like the city itself was holding its breath. The Taoist master turned to Tony, his face stern. "She has been given the chance to move on. Whether she accepts it is not for us to know. But the bond is loosened. You may breathe again." For the first time in weeks, Tony felt the crushing weight lift from his chest. He bowed deeply, gratitude spilling from him, though part of him still wondered. Had she truly gone, or was this only another pause in a cycle that stretched across lifetimes? In the weeks that followed the transcendence ritual, Tony's life regained a fragile sense of normalcy. The parking garage no longer felt suffocating. The heavy dread that once gripped him whenever he neared the concrete pillar had eased. For the first time in months, he slept through the night without waking in a cold sweat, gasping for air.
But shadows of doubt remained.
Every time he passed a mirrored surface, a store window, a glass door, the dark gloss of the MTR train, he found himself looking for a trace of red. Most days, there was nothing. Yet sometimes, in the corner of his vision, he thought he saw fabric swaying, gone when he blinked. Miss Ku, he realized, had become part of him. Whether she had moved on or not, he would never be able to erase her. She was stitched into his story, into the thread of his soul across lifetimes. One night, determined to put his questions to rest, Tony decided to track down the security guard, the mysterious man who had saved him on the night Miss Chu nearly strangled him. The guard who had called her by name, who had spoken with the calm authority of someone who understood Yuan Yip. Tony returned to the same garage, heart thudding as he approached the entrance booth. Younger guard sat inside, reading a newspaper. Tony cleared his throat, asked politely about the older guard who worked late-night patrols, the one who had helped him weeks earlier. The younger guard looked puzzled. "Older guard? Sir? I've worked here 6 years. There's only 3 of us on rotation." "No one matches what you describe," Tony insisted. He described the man's face, his calm demeanor, the night of the encounter. Still, the guard shook his head. "I'm sorry. Maybe you saw one of us and were too tired to remember clearly. But there's no man like that here." Tony left unsettled. How could that be? He distinctly remembered the man's uniform, his voice, the way he had leaned into the car window to ask if Tony was all right, and above all, the way he had commanded Miss Ku to let go. If the guard never existed, then who or what had saved him? Theories swirled in his mind. Perhaps it was a benevolent spirit who had chosen to intervene. In Cantonese folklore, not all ghosts are vengeful. Some linger out of love, or duty, or protection. Could it have been an ancestor, or even a karmic ally from another lifetime, stepping in to prevent his death? Or perhaps, and this possibility chilled him most, the guard had been an illusion conjured by the ritual of resentment itself. Miss Ku's rage had been so strong, maybe his own subconscious had manifested a protector to balance it, a spiritual equal conjured from the depths of his soul. Whatever the truth, Tony knew one thing: he had been given one chance. If not for that mysterious intervention, he might not be alive to wonder. The uncertainty gnawed at him. He stopped driving altogether, letting his totaled car remain in the mechanic's yard. Public transport, with its bustle of strangers and fluorescent lights, felt safer. He avoided empty stairwells, avoided looking too long at shadows. But sometimes, late at night, he would lie awake, replaying the sound of that calm voice in his head. Miss Chu, debts from a past life should be settled in the past. Let it go. Whoever that man was, spirit or guardian or memory, he had stepped into Tony's life just long enough to tip the balance between life and death and then vanished. Tony never saw him again. While Tony's ordeal revealed the grip of past life resentment, another story emerged from the same city, proving that karmic debts aren't the only dangers lurking during Ghost Festival. This one belonged to Sunny, a finance worker who lived the rhythm of late nights and endless deadlines. On Ghost Festival, while incense smoke curled in the streets and families set food out for the wandering dead, Sunny stayed late at the office. By the time he left, the city was nearly silent, save for the crackle of burning joss paper along the curbs. He walked into the factory building where his car was parked, ash swirling at his ankles. The garage was one level below ground. He pressed the call button, and the elevator doors opened with their usual metallic groan. The cabin was empty. Stepped inside. Halfway down, the elevator shuddered violently and froze. The panel lights flickered. The display said he was stuck between floors. Sunny jabbed the buttons in frustration. The emergency call connected to nothing but static. Pulling out his phone, he found no signal. Then, from the corner of the elevator, he heard it. A woman's voice, faint but steady, singing. It was an old Cantonese ballad, one his grandmother used to hum when he was a child. But here, in the sealed, frozen box of the lift, it felt impossibly out of place. Cold air slid down his neck like invisible fingers. He didn't dare turn around. Instead, he stared straight at the display, his pulse hammering, hands slamming random buttons. Finally, with a jolt, the elevator lurched back to life. The doors opened to the dim, cavernous garage. He bolted out, refusing to look back, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. He reached his car, slid inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. Relief washed over him until the radio flicked on by itself. First came static. Then beneath it, the same song he had just heard in the elevator. The same voice. Not a recording. Not the original singer. The exact same spectral tone now filling the car. His breath caught. He slammed the radio off and sped toward the exit. But as he left the garage, instinct made him glance in the rearview mirror. By the gate stood a woman in a traditional cheongsam, pale, still, eyes fixed on him. He blinked, and she was gone. The worst came when he looked at the dashboard clock. It read 2:00 a.m. He had left the office just after 11 p.m., even if the elevator delay had lasted a few minutes. There was no way it should already be 2 hours later. Sunny had lost time. In Cantonese belief, this is called ghost hitting the wall, when a spirit traps someone in an illusion or alternate space. Victims describe walking in circles, reliving the same hallway, or suddenly discovering that hours have passed, though they recall only minutes. For Sunny, the elevator had been more than mechanical failure. It had been a trap, a pocket of altered reality, spun by whatever presence sang that song. Since that night, Sunny avoided late work during Ghost Festival. He never again took that elevator after midnight. Some debts tie us to spirits from the past, like Tony and Miss Chu. Others simply ensnare us in their wandering, like Sunny's singer in the lift. But both stories remind us of the same truth. Ghost Festival is not just ritual, it is survival. The candles, the offerings, the incense, these are not empty traditions. They are lifelines, small flames meant to light the way. Food for the forgotten, paper bridges between the living and the dead. Because whether it is a woman in red dress calling you by a name you daren't remember, or a song from another time stealing hours from your night, the lesson is the same. The dead do not forget. And sometimes they are closer than you think.